Hello again, welcome back to the channel. Glad you could join me. Today I wanted to talk about Watchmen. It's a comic by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. This one has been cited as a seminal comic in a ton of different places. It was very much an influential comic. Now, I'm talking about it because one, I've read it and I enjoyed it, and two, I came across an article called 5 classic, and they put classic in quotation marks, comics you can skip and want to read instead. And this one was the top of their list, that you should skip this comic. And what I want to do is I want to make the case that that this is the opposite. You should read this and skip the garbage that they suggest instead. Now, obviously you can see that I have a bias here. I'm not going to deny that. I liked Watchmen. And as I said, it's been cited as a seminal comic from a variety of sources. Let's set this up. So it's on an alternate Earth, and if you know anything about comics, you'll know that this is in the DC continuity. It doesn't have Batman, it doesn't have anything like that, but it is part of the DC continuity now. So this was, as I said, written by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, and Alan Moore is actually a pretty controversial figure himself in comic books. Anyway, alternate Earth. The difference between that Earth and our Earth is that they have superheroes. We have it's in the 1980s, and several years before all this takes place, Dr. Manhattan came into being. He was a young scientist working on the Manhattan Project, and he was given superhuman abilities. And he was used as kind of a living nuclear deterrent by the United States. And so the Cold War between the United States and the Soviets really was pushed quite heavily because of the fact that we had this guy who could basically go in and destroy Russia at the snap of his fingers. As things go along, the superhumans are eventually outlawed. There's an act in 1977 that outlawed them. Now, there's two that still operate. There's Dr. Manhattan and the Comedian. Now, these were government-sanctioned agents, and then we get to 1985. 1985 rolls around, and the New York Police Department is investigating the murder of one Edward Blake. And this is where we meet another costume vigilante. His name is Rorschach. Rorschach, because he has this mask that he wears that constantly shifts and makes it look like he has the Rorschach ink blots on his face. So he starts investigating this murder as well, and finds out and discovers that Edward Blake was the true identity of this sanctioned superhero, the Comedian. And so he goes and visits some other retired superheroes. One is the Night Owl, kind of a Batman type superhero. He has gadgets and he dresses in the cape and cowl kind of thing, but he's the Night Owl. He's actually the second iteration of the Night Owl, took over from the first. And he goes to visit Dr. Manhattan and his lover, Laurie Juice Basic. I think that's how you pronounce that. She is the Silk Spectre, the second iteration of the Silk Spectre as well. They also go and visit, or he also goes and visits Adrian Veidt, who is called Ozymandias, the smartest superhero, the smartest man alive, I think is what his tagline was. And he warns them that whoever killed the Comedian could be coming after them. Well, Dr. Manhattan gets blamed for causing cancer in former lovers and colleagues, and so he takes off and goes to Mars. the Cold War heats up because now the Soviets are sitting there going, oh, we don't have to worry about the Americans because their big nuclear deterrent is no longer viable. And I mean, Dr. Manhattan has his own problems. He is a god living among mortals. And so he has kind of distanced himself. He doesn't have that connection that he used to have with humans because he no longer is a human. He's so far beyond what a human is. He goes to Mars and basically terraforms the planet all by himself, kind of thing. Rorschach is captured and put into prison, and that's when Night Owl and Silk Spectre kind of sit there and get their heads together and say, you know what? There is something going on here. We need to go get Rorschach. And they decide to break him out of prison. They get their costumes back on again and go back into to crime fighting. Okay, so there's a lot more that goes on to that. Maybe you've seen the Watchmen movie. The movie it's kind of weird to say this. The movie was okay. There were a couple things that could have been done differently / better, and the ending was very different from what the ending is in the book. Anyway, now as I said, I read this article and they're talking about how this was a realistic superhero and it was a deconstruction of the superhero concept, condemnation of the Cold War era politics, probably the best-selling graphic of all time. These are from the article I'm quoting from. Now, the next thing is 37 years removed from both the publishing and political context in which it first appeared has been largely blood-drive meaning by the endless imitators who tried to further deconstruct the superhero and somehow landed on fascism is cool instead. Okay. Now, it could be, and it probably is a good point, that some of the meaning has been bled from the comic by the imitators who've come later. That doesn't mean you shouldn't read the original that people are trying to imitate. It means you should go back to the original and you should see what made the original so awesome to begin with. The fact that it's a commentary on Cold War era politics has nothing to do with the fact that you shouldn't read it now. Just because we have progressed past the Cold War, there's still a lot going on in politics and stuff that is just as relevant today as it was when Watchmen was first written by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. The fact that government and big business are pushed as being infallible and that we should just take them at their word when obviously there's stuff going on behind the scenes that we should be skeptical of. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that's in this book. And just because other deconstructions have come along later, and maybe also DC has apparently done continuations of the story when this was meant to be kind of a one-shot. It was a one and done. We do this and we're done with this story. We don't move on from there. And DC has watered it down with their own continuations. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't go back. You shouldn't ignore. You should ignore the crap that came afterwards, and you should go to Watchmen and read Watchmen. Watchmen is seminal for a reason. There is still a valid reason to read Watchmen. You shouldn't ignore it. It's a good, tightly written comic. It's well paced. The characters are brilliant. Rorschach is what if Batman, but completely deranged. We have Night Owl, who is a Batman analog, and he's much more the level-headed detective and thing. But we have what if Batman, he's a masked vigilante, but he has no compunctions about ending the lives of the bad guys that he's up against. He's a very twisted individual, and he's well written. He is compelling in his kind of insanity, and that's what makes it the reason you should read this. Now, this particular artist trots out a comic called Bitch Planet that you should read instead, by Kelly Sue DeConnick and Valentine DeLandro. One, why? Why should I read this instead of Watchmen? That's been so popular. It's still being reprinted and bought today. It is cited as seminal work today, even though it's 30 some odd years old. It had a movie deal. Yeah, the movie wasn't so great, but obviously if this other comic book was so great, I haven't heard anything about it. It's not like I keep my my finger on the pulse of comics all that much anymore, but the fact of the matter is that people still talk about Watchmen. I haven't heard a thing. This is the first time I've ever heard anything about this particular comic, Bitch Planet. I mean, maybe it is good, but the thing is that it's apparently focused on females who are deemed non-compliant, and so they're shipped off to a prison planet. Sure, dark and gritty, whatever, but the thing is that, and it says it's a dark, cynical take on human nature, scathing political commentary, and heavily inspired by pulp and lowbrow media, women in prison exploitation films. Okay, but that still doesn't tell me why I should even read it. Watchmen. This one is a deconstruction of the comic book superheroes. And very much this, I don't know. Maybe it's feminist, which is really weird for a comic. Comic buyers are typically men, boys and men. I'm sensing that this is more politically motivated, because it doesn't, at the end it says, while also engaging in the real world systems of oppression that hit BIPOC and LGBTQ plus women especially hard. So this to me is, this guy is not pushing, this is an awesome comic book and you should read it because it's an awesome comic book. It's being pushed because it's political. Yes, there is politics in Watchmen, but that's not the center of the Watchmen comic. The Watchmen comic is a dark study of superheroes and superhero comics in and of themselves. And what if these comic book heroes were a little bit more realistic? What if they were a little bit more dark and gritty, like the Cold War era would? I mean, I lived through the Cold War, and it was pretty bleak. It's one of the reasons why people from that era don't trust government all that much. But anyway, that being said, read Watchmen. Don't read whatever this other garbage is. Read Watchmen. This one, Bitch Planet, is probably derivative of Watchmen anyway. I can't say. I haven't read it. I will admit that right now. I have not read this. This could be great. But just from the blurb that this author gives, I would say it's politically motivated first, comic second, whereas Watchmen is comic first, political is woven in and part of the story, but it's not the center of the story. It's not the center of attention, and that's what makes Watchmen a better comic. It's got a better, tighter story, and because it doesn't focus on the political messaging, it's probably going to be a much better read than this other one. Anyway, let me know if you've read Watchmen. Let me know what you thought about it. If you didn't like it, let me know why. I would love to know why you didn't like it. It could be that it was a little bit more violent than you liked, because, as I said, this one is definitely more of a realistic take on superheroes than the traditional, like Batman, Superman, that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's it for today. Like, share, subscribe, all that other stuff, and until next time, enjoy what you're reading.